Your body reacts before your mind explains. A tone shifts. A face tightens. A room grows quiet. And something in you contracts. You don't think first. You feel. Your chest tightens. Your jaw sets. Your stomach drops. Then the explanation arrives. We tend to believe memory is narrative, a story, an image, a sequence of events. But emotional memory does not require story. It requires imprint. Your nervous system encodes patterns long before you can describe them, long before you have language for them. As a child, you did not analyze tension. You adapted to it. You did not narrate rejection. You felt its temperature. The body learned which tones meant danger, which silences meant withdrawal, which expressions meant shame. That learning did not become a sentence. It became a reflex, a shift in posture, a change in breathing, a readiness to defend or disappear. Narrative memory lives in language. Emotional memory lives in sensation. Sensation is faster than language. When something resembles an old emotional imprint, your body reacts before your mind identifies why. This is why reactions often confuse you. You say, "I don't know why that bothered me," or "that was an overreaction." But the reaction was not random. It was remembered. Not remembered as a scene, remembered as a state, tension, vulnerability, threat. The body stores unresolved experiences as patterns of activation. When the present resembles the past, activation returns, and it returns instantly. Your heart rate shifts before you interpret. Your muscles brace before you think. Explanation is slower. The mind tries to catch up. It searches for a reason. It builds a story to justify the feeling. This person disrespected me. That situation was unfair. Sometimes that story is accurate. Sometimes it is assembled after the fact. The order matters. First, the body reacts. Then, the mind explains. We often believe it happens in reverse. But emotional memory does not wait for narrative permission. It scans for similarity. It detects tone, posture, rhythm. And when something matches, it activates the old state. This is why you can intellectually trust someone and still feel guarded. Why you can logically know you are safe and still feel anxious. The body is responding to pattern, not argument. Narrative memory explains what happened. Emotional memory predicts what might happen. Prediction is faster than explanation, and faster systems dominate slower ones. So when you react before you understand, it is not irrational. It is conditioned. The body remembered, and the mind is still writing the story. Reaction is faster than reflection. Always. You don't decide to tense. You tense. You don't consciously choose to withdraw. You feel the pull first. Then you justify it. The nervous system operates on pattern recognition. It does not wait for full analysis. It scans for resemblance, tone, facial expression, timing, energy. If something feels familiar to a past threat, activation begins. And activation is immediate. Heart rate shifts, breathing changes, muscles brace, before a single sentence forms. Explanation belongs to the cognitive system, and cognition is slower. It assembles context, searches for logic, constructs narrative. But by the time the narrative appears, the body is already mobilized. This creates a common illusion. You believe the story caused the reaction, when in reality, the reaction invited the story. The order is reversed. Emotional activation creates urgency. Urgency demands meaning. Meaning arrives as explanation. The mind builds a reason that fits the state, not necessarily the full reality. If you feel sudden irritation, your mind scans for something irritating. If you feel sudden insecurity, your mind searches for evidence of rejection. The body sets the tone. The mind harmonizes with it. This is why arguments escalate quickly. Two nervous systems reacting faster than two minds can regulate. Each person explaining after activation has already begun. Each believing their explanation came first. Reaction outruns understanding because it was designed to. Survival favors speed. Analysis requires time. Time is a luxury in perceived threat. Even when there is no real danger, the body responds to resemblance. Resemblance is enough. You may say, "I know this isn't a big deal," and still feel your body prepare for impact. Because knowing is cognitive, preparation is physiological. The body does not wait for permission from thought. It acts on prediction. Prediction built from past imprint. When reaction outruns explanation, it is not weakness. It is conditioning moving at its natural speed. Understanding arrives later, and often feels like it came first. If this perspective resonates, like the video. Subscribe if you want more. No pressure, just awareness. When the body reacts first, it feels certain. Certainty is convincing. Your chest tightens, your voice sharpens, your thoughts narrow. And in that state, the interpretation feels obvious. This is disrespect. This isn't safe. They're pulling away. The reaction feels like evidence. But emotional memory does not report truth. It reports resemblance. Resemblance to past pain. Resemblance to past threat. Resemblance to past vulnerability. The body does not evaluate context with precision. It evaluates pattern similarity. Similarity is enough to activate certainty. And once activation begins, perception narrows. You look for confirming details. You filter out neutral information. The state shapes the story. Emotional memory creates a felt sense of familiarity. Familiarity feels accurate. But accuracy and familiarity are not the same. A tone that resembles an old wound can feel like the wound itself, even when the present is different. This is why overreactions feel justified in the moment. Your body is responding to something real, but it may not be responding to something current. It may be responding to something historical. When emotional memory activates, it compresses time. Past and present merge. The current situation carries the emotional weight of older experiences. And because the feeling is intense, it feels true. Intensity creates conviction. But conviction does not guarantee accuracy. The mind then builds a narrative around the activated state. The narrative protects coherence. It explains why the reaction makes sense. And once the story is built, it reinforces the state. Reaction strengthens narrative. Narrative strengthens reaction. This loop makes emotional memory feel like objective reality, but it is filtered through past imprint, through older predictions. Misreading emotional memory as truth keeps the pattern intact, because if the feeling is absolute truth, there is nothing to question. But if the feeling is remembered activation, There is space. Space between what is happening now and what was learned before. Recognizing that difference does not erase the reaction, but it loosens its authority. The body may remember, but remembrance is not always reality, and certainty born from activation is not the same as clarity born from observation. If the body remembers first, then integration cannot begin with explanation. It begins with experience. You cannot argue your nervous system into calm. You cannot lecture a reflex into dissolving. Reflexes change through repetition. When activation rises and you remain present. When tension appears and you do not immediately escape. When vulnerability surfaces and you do not armor over it. The body records something new. It records that survival did not require the old reaction, that intensity did not equal danger, that discomfort did not end in collapse. This is how emotional memory updates, not through insight alone, through corrective experience. At first, the activation still comes. Your chest tightens, your thoughts narrow, but you stay. You breathe. You do not immediately obey the reflex. Each time this happens, prediction weakens. The body learns that resemblance is not repetition, that similarity does not guarantee outcome. Narrative memory can understand in a moment. Emotional memory requires many moments, many exposures, many non-catastrophic endings. That slowness can feel frustrating, but slowness is stability, because what was learned over years will not unlearn in a single insight. Integration is quiet. You notice reactions shorten. Certainty softens. The gap between feeling and action widens. The body still remembers, but it remembers differently. It remembers that it survived without overreacting, that it endured without withdrawing, that it remained without collapsing. This is not suppression. It is recalibration. Emotional memory and narrative memory begin to align. The story matches the state. When that alignment happens, stability returns, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer dictates prediction. The body still reacts, but it does not dominate. Understanding explained what happened. Experience reshaped how it lives inside you, and that reshaping is what makes reaction slower, more flexible, more accurate to the present. If this helped you see the difference between what your body remembers and what your mind explains, consider liking the video and subscribing. Not for certainty, for observation. Emotional suppression feels like control. You feel something rise, irritation, sadness, fear, and instead of expressing it, you tighten, you steady your voice, you regulate your face, you say, "I'm fine." On the surface, this looks mature. You didn't overreact, you didn't escalate, you didn't burden anyone. But suppression is not processing, it is postponement. Emotion is physiological before it is verbal. It changes breathing, it alters muscle tone, it shifts attention. When you decide not to feel something, you are not erasing it. You are interrupting its expression. The body does not interpret suppression as resolution. It interprets it as containment. Containment requires effort, micro-tension in the jaw, subtle contraction in the chest, a slight increase in vigilance. These adjustments are small, but repeated daily, they accumulate. You may believe that because you did not cry, you are no longer sad. Because you did not argue, you are no longer angry. Because you did not admit fear, you are no longer afraid. But emotion does not disappear when ignored. It loses its conscious label, and once unlabeled, it moves. Suppression works temporarily because it reduces visible disruption. It protects reputation. It protects relationships. It protects composure. Composure feels powerful, especially if emotional expression once led to chaos. If you learned early that showing emotion created problems, you learned to contain it. If sadness was dismissed, you internalized it. If anger was punished, you swallowed it. If fear was mocked, you concealed it. The system adapted. Adaptation feels intelligent. You became stable, predictable, difficult to destabilize externally. But internally, the energy does not vanish. It waits. Emotions are regulatory signals. They are designed to move through you. When interrupted repeatedly, they convert from signal to pressure. Pressure does not scream. It builds. You may notice small shifts, a shorter fuse than usual, a heavier fatigue than expected, an unexplained restlessness at night. Nothing dramatic, just subtle leakage. The mind says, "I'm fine." The body says, "Something is unresolved." Suppression creates a split between narrative and physiology. You tell yourself you are calm, but your nervous system remains activated. Over time, this split becomes normalized. You stop recognizing what you feel in real time. You recognize only behavior. I snapped. I withdrew. I felt numb. But the original emotion, the first wave, was interrupted. What you refuse to feel consciously does not dissolve. It reorganizes. And when it reorganizes, it no longer arrives as sadness or anger. It arrives as something less clear, less direct, harder to trace. Suppression protects the moment, but it does not remove the emotion. It only delays its expression. When emotion is suppressed, it does not disappear, it relocates. Emotion begins as sensation, a tightening in the throat, a heaviness in the chest, a heat behind the eyes, a subtle agitation in the stomach. Before it becomes language, it is already in the body. If expression is interrupted, the physiological activation remains. The nervous system does not receive closure. It remains slightly elevated, not enough to alarm you, just enough to alter baseline. Suppressed anger often becomes tension, in the jaw, in the shoulders, in the hands. Suppressed fear becomes vigilance, scanning tone, reading micro-expressions, anticipating rejection. Suppressed sadness becomes fatigue, not dramatic exhaustion, just heaviness without clear cause. You may believe you are emotionally neutral, but neutrality with muscle contraction is not neutrality. It is restraint. Emotion that is not processed remains metabolically active. Your body continues to carry it in subtle ways. You grind your teeth at night. You struggle to relax even when nothing is wrong. You feel inexplicably irritated by minor inconveniences. The original emotion is gone from awareness, but the activation persists. The system seeks discharge. Emotion is movement. If direct expression is blocked, movement finds indirect pathways. Restlessness, overworking, compulsive scrolling, over-exercising. Activity becomes a substitute for feeling. Sometimes suppression produces numbness, not because there is no emotion, but because the nervous system dampens intensity to prevent overflow. This dampening does not target one feeling. It reduces range. Joy narrows. Excitement flattens. Connection dulls. You trade volatility for blunted experience. It feels stable, but it is restrictive. There is also cognitive displacement. Emotion that cannot surface as anger may resurface as criticism. Emotion that cannot surface as grief may resurface as impatience. Emotion that cannot surface as fear may resurface as control. The content shifts. The activation remains. This is why reactions sometimes feel disproportionate. A minor comment triggers a large response. A small inconvenience produces unusual frustration. It appears irrational, but it is cumulative. Suppression creates storage. Storage increases sensitivity. The threshold lowers. What once required significant provocation now requires very little. You are not overreacting in isolation. You are reacting to layered residue. Residue from previous moments where emotion was managed instead of processed. The body keeps score, not symbolically, physiologically. Heart rate variability shifts. Muscle tone adjusts. Breathing patterns shorten. These changes become baseline. You adapt to the tension. Until you forget what relaxed actually feels like. Suppressed emotion does not evaporate. It converts into posture, into tone, into subtle agitation. And eventually, it demands expression in a form you did not consciously choose. If this made you pause, like the video. Subscribe if you want to keep observing. Suppressed emotion does not stay silent. It changes form. When anger is not allowed to surface directly, it rarely disappears. It becomes sharp humor, subtle sarcasm, a clipped tone that feels reasonable but carries heat. You insist you are calm, but your delivery says otherwise. When sadness is not processed, it often becomes detachment. You withdraw slightly. You respond more slowly. You engage less deeply. You tell yourself you are just tired. And maybe you are. But sometimes fatigue is grief without language. Fear, when suppressed, often disguises itself as control. You overplan. You overconfirm. You over-explain. Not because you enjoy precision, because uncertainty activates something you do not want to feel. Indirect expression is strategic. It allows emotion to move without appearing emotional. You maintain composure while releasing pressure. But indirect release distorts clarity. Instead of saying, "That hurt," you become distant. Instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," you become irritable. Instead of saying, "I'm afraid," you become rigid. The original emotion is hidden even from you. This is how misalignment forms. Your internal state says one thing, your external behavior says another. People respond to the behavior, not the concealed emotion. And that creates confusion. You may feel misunderstood, but what is visible is not what is primary. The primary emotion was intercepted. What remains is secondary expression. Over time, this creates relational distortion. Others adapt to your irritability instead of your sadness. They respond to your control instead of your fear. They accommodate your withdrawal instead of your hurt. The original need goes unmet. Suppression therefore multiplies consequences. The emotion itself remains unprocessed, and the indirect behavior creates new tension. This tension confirms your belief that emotions complicate things, so you suppress more. It becomes cyclical. Emotion arises. Suppression interrupts. Indirect expression leaks. Relational friction increases. Suppression strengthens. The loop reinforces itself. Sometimes indirect expression is internal. Self-criticism intensifies. Rumination increases. Motivation fluctuates. You cannot locate the cause, because the cause was not permitted to surface clearly. Suppressed emotion does not leave the system. It bypasses awareness. And when awareness is bypassed, choice narrows. Instead of consciously feeling anger and deciding how to respond, you unconsciously express it through tone. Instead of consciously acknowledging sadness and seeking support, you unconsciously withdraw. The emotion moves, but without your consent, and when it resurfaces indirectly, it feels disconnected from its origin, which makes it harder to understand, harder to trace, harder to resolve. Suppression does not eliminate emotion, it fragments it. When emotion is delayed long enough, you stop noticing the delay. You tell yourself you are composed, rational, low maintenance. You rarely escalate. You rarely demand. You rarely expose what unsettles you. From the outside, this looks stable. But stability built on suppression has a cost. When you mute anger, you also mute clarity. When you mute sadness, you also mute depth. When you mute fear, you also mute instinct. Emotion is not just discomfort, it is information. Suppression interrupts that information. You lose access to real-time feedback. You cannot tell when something crossed a boundary because you learned to override the signal. You cannot tell when something hurt because you converted hurt into silence. Over time, this creates disconnection. Disconnection from others, and disconnection from yourself. You begin responding from habit instead of awareness. You perform calm instead of inhabiting it. There is also a subtle erosion of identity. If you consistently suppress emotion, you become skilled at neutrality. But neutrality is not authenticity. Authenticity requires access to internal states. When those states are chronically managed, you experience yourself as flat. Not unstable, just muted. Muted joy, muted anger, muted longing. The system becomes predictable, but not fully alive. Emotional delay also distorts timing. When feeling is postponed repeatedly, it accumulates. Eventually, expression arrives with disproportionate intensity. You react more strongly than expected. You withdraw more abruptly than intended. You say something sharper than planned. It feels sudden, but it was building. Suppression is efficient in the short term. It prevents immediate disruption. But long term, it reduces emotional literacy. You lose precision. Instead of identifying, "I'm disappointed," you register only, "I'm irritated." Instead of identifying, "I'm overwhelmed," you register only, "I'm exhausted." Precision narrows. Without precision, regulation weakens, because regulation requires accurate recognition. You cannot process what you refuse to name. You cannot release what you do not acknowledge. Allowing emotion is not indulgence. It is integration. It means letting anger inform boundaries, letting sadness inform attachment, letting fear inform caution, not acting impulsively, but not interrupting the signal. When emotion is felt in real time, it completes its cycle. Activation rises, expression occurs, regulation follows, the system resets. When emotion is suppressed, activation lingers, regulation is partial, reset never fully arrives. What you do not feel consciously does not vanish. It reorganizes behavior. It reshapes tone. It influences choices. And often, it directs your life indirectly. If this exposed something you recognize in yourself, consider liking the video and subscribing. Pain is not what the nervous system fears most. Uncertainty is. We assume growth is avoided because it is difficult, because it demands effort, because it requires discipline. But effort is not the real barrier. The real barrier is unpredictability. The unknown does not provide a map, and the nervous system prefers maps, even painful ones. Familiar pain is structured. It has rhythm. It has rules. You know how rejection feels. You know how disappointment unfolds. You know how certain arguments escalate. There is predictability inside it. Predictability regulates the body, even when the experience itself is unpleasant. Because regulation is not the same as happiness. Regulation means the system can anticipate what comes next. Anticipation reduces chaos. Chaos feels threatening. If you grew up in an environment where tension was normal, calm can feel unfamiliar. If inconsistency shaped early attachment, stability can feel suspicious. Not because stability is unsafe, but because it is unknown. And the unknown cannot be predicted. The nervous system chooses what it can predict. This is why people repeat relational patterns, why they return to dynamics that hurt them, why they sabotage progress when it begins to shift their identity. The pain is familiar. The change is not. Familiarity creates an illusion of control. If you know how something ends, you can brace for it. Bracing feels active. Active feels safer than exposed, even when the outcome is painful. The nervous system does not rank experiences by fulfillment. It ranks them by predictability. Predictability equals survivability. Growth destabilizes predictability. It introduces outcomes that have no history, no stored reference point. Without reference, the body cannot anticipate. Without anticipation, it cannot regulate. So it returns to what it knows. This return is rarely conscious. No one says, "I prefer this pain." The body simply relaxes inside what is familiar, even if what is familiar is limiting. Familiar pain feels structured. Unknown change feels uncontained. Containment feels safer than possibility. The mind may want growth, but the nervous system wants continuity. Continuity feels like survival, and survival is chosen before fulfillment. This is why stability is often chosen over growth, not because growth is wrong, but because familiarity regulates faster than hope. And regulation, even through pain, feels safer than the unknown. The nervous system does not ask, "Is this fulfilling?" It asks, "Have we survived this before?" If the answer is yes, tension lowers, even if what was survived was painful. Pain that has already been endured becomes categorized. It has boundaries. You know how it begins. You know how it escalates. You know how it ends. That predictability reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty requires vigilance. Vigilance is exhausting. Exhaustion feels dangerous. So the body often chooses the pain it understands over the change it cannot map. Not because it enjoys pain, because it can anticipate it. Anticipation allows preparation. Preparation creates a sense of control. Control regulates fear, even if the situation itself is harmful. Consider how someone stays in a dynamic they can describe as unhealthy. They know the pattern. They can explain the dysfunction. But the rhythm is familiar. The emotional terrain is mapped. Unknown change has no rhythm yet, no internal rehearsal, no stored prediction of outcome. The body cannot prepare for what it has not experienced. And when the body cannot prepare, It interprets the situation as risk. Risk increases activation. Activation feels like danger, so the system retreats to what feels manageable. Predictable pain is manageable. Unpredictable growth is not. This preference operates beneath awareness. You may believe you want change. You may even move toward it. But when stability shifts too quickly, the nervous system pulls you back. Not out of weakness, out of regulation. Regulation favors the known. If chaos once defined your environment, calm may feel unfamiliar. If inconsistency once shaped attachment, consistency may feel unnatural. The body relaxes in what matches its history, even when that history included pain. This is why familiar suffering can feel stabilizing. It aligns with expectation. Expectation reduces shock. Growth disrupts expectation. Disruption increases uncertainty. Uncertainty increases activation. And activation often feels like a warning, a signal to retreat. The nervous system prefers predictable pain because predictability regulates faster than possibility. Possibility requires trust. Trust requires tolerance of uncertainty. And tolerance is learned slowly. Until then, the known, even if painful, feels safer than the unknown. If this helped you notice something about your own mind, consider liking the video and subscribing. More of this is coming. Stability and security are not the same thing, but they feel similar. Stability means nothing is shifting. The pattern continues. The dynamic repeats. The rhythm is intact. Security means something else. Security is the absence of threat. Stability is the absence of change. Those are not identical conditions, but the nervous system often confuses them. If something has remained consistent, it registers as manageable. Manageable feels safe. You may stay in a situation that limits you, not because it fulfills you, but because it is stable. The arguments are predictable. The disappointments follow a script. Even the tension has timing. That timing reduces shock. Shock feels dangerous. When nothing surprises the nervous system, activation lowers. Lower activation feels like relief. Relief feels like safety. But relief from unpredictability is not the same as protection from harm. This is where the confusion forms. You feel calmer in the familiar pain than you do in new possibility. The calm is misinterpreted as security. But it is only regulation. Regulation inside a known environment. Unknown change disrupts that regulation. It introduces variables. It removes the script. Without a script, the nervous system cannot anticipate. Anticipation is how it maintains control. Without anticipation, activation rises. Activation feels like warning. So the unknown feels unsafe. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is unstructured. Unstructured environments require adaptation. Adaptation requires uncertainty. Uncertainty challenges identity. If you have defined yourself around surviving certain pain, removing that pain removes a reference point. Who are you without the struggle you understand? Who are you without the conflict you've learned to navigate? Growth threatens not only comfort, but self-concept. So the system chooses stability, because stability preserves continuity. Continuity preserves identity. Identity preservation often outweighs improvement. This is why familiar pain feels safer, not because it is good, but because it does not require redefinition. Security is not the absence of change. It is the capacity to tolerate it. But until tolerance expands, stability will continue to feel like safety, even when it is only repetition. If familiar pain regulates you, then leaving it cannot begin with force. Force feels like threat. You cannot shame yourself into growth. You cannot pressure your nervous system into trusting uncertainty. Pressure increases activation, and activation pulls you back toward what is predictable. If the unknown feels overwhelming, the system will retreat to familiarity, even if that familiarity hurts. So the shift must be gradual, not dramatic, not performative. Incremental exposure teaches safety. When you step slightly outside the old pattern and nothing catastrophic follows, the nervous system records new data. It learns that unpredictability does not equal collapse, that new dynamics do not erase identity, that unfamiliar calm does not signal danger. This learning cannot be rushed, because it is not cognitive. It is regulatory. You may still feel the pull toward what you know. That pull is not weakness. It is conditioning seeking equilibrium. But equilibrium can expand. Each time you remain in a new pattern long enough to regulate, each time you tolerate uncertainty without retreating, stability begins to include the unfamiliar. What was once activating becomes manageable. What was once unknown becomes integrated. Security slowly detaches from repetition. It attaches instead to adaptability, to the ability to remain steady while circumstances shift. That is real safety. Not the absence of change, but the capacity to endure it without collapse. Familiar pain once felt safer because it was structured. Unknown change felt dangerous because it was undefined. But as tolerance grows, the unknown becomes less threatening, and stability no longer requires suffering. If this helped you understand why growth can feel unsafe even when it's necessary, consider liking the video and subscribing. Not for motivation, for clarity. Hyper-independence does not begin as confidence. It begins as adaptation. There was a moment, or many small moments, when relying on someone felt unsafe, a promise that shifted, an emotion that was dismissed, a need that was met with irritation. The nervous system records these experiences without debate. It does not analyze intention. It does not search for nuance. It draws a simple conclusion. Depending on others increases risk. From that point forward, self-reliance becomes regulation. You learn to anticipate your own needs, to solve before asking, to carry before reaching. At first, it feels empowering. You are capable, efficient, unburdened by expectation. No one can disappoint you if no one is required. But the strength is tense. It is maintained through vigilance. You double-check. You over-prepare. You mentally rehearse independence in every scenario. Not because you love control, because control feels stable. Hyperindependence is often misread as emotional maturity. You do not demand. You do not cling. You do not rely. But underneath the composure is avoidance. Avoidance of uncertainty, avoidance of potential rejection, avoidance of feeling exposed. To need someone is to give them leverage. Leverage over your comfort, over your stability, over your sense of worth. If early experiences linked need with humiliation or abandonment, the body learns quickly. Do not need. Needing becomes synonymous with weakness. and weakness becomes intolerable. So you build competence. You become the one who figures things out, the one who does not complain, the one who handles it. Identity forms around capability. Capability feels safe. But safety built on isolation is rigid. It does not bend. It does not share weight. It absorbs. Over time, this rigidity becomes invisible. You no longer notice the distance you maintain. You call it independence, standards, strength. But watch the internal response when someone offers help. There is discomfort, subtle irritation, a reflexive, "I've got it." Help feels intrusive, not because it is, but because it challenges the rule that kept you stable. Do not rely. The illusion of strength is convincing. You function, you achieve, you rarely collapse. But the system is organized around prevention. Prevent disappointment. Prevent dependency. Prevent exposure. And when strength is built to prevent vulnerability, connection begins to feel like risk. Not because others are dangerous, but because closeness requires loosening control. And control is the architecture of your safety. Dependency is neutral, but your body may not experience it that way. To depend on someone is to place something valuable outside your control. Time, care, emotional stability. If early experiences taught you that what you placed outside yourself was mishandled, dependency becomes threat. The nervous system does not remember stories. It remembers sensations. Waiting, uncertainty, disappointment, embarrassment for needing too much. Those sensations fuse with one conclusion. Needing creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates risk. So the system updates its strategy. Eliminate the variable. Do it yourself. This is not arrogance. It is containment. When you contain your needs, you contain potential harm. No waiting, no hoping, no negotiating, just execution. But dependency is not only logistical, it is emotional. To rely on someone emotionally means allowing them to see you unsettled, unsure, incomplete. That exposure can feel destabilizing. If you were once dismissed for your feelings, or told you were too sensitive, or made to feel dramatic for wanting reassurance, your body learned something precise. Your needs are inconvenient. Inconvenience threatens connection, so minimize the need. Better to appear self-contained than risk being seen as excessive. Over time, this minimization becomes automatic. You downplay discomfort. You self-soothe before asking. You rationalize neglect. It's fine. I can handle it. It's not a big deal. The language sounds mature, but the motivation is defensive, because asking requires tolerating two possibilities. They might respond, or they might not. That uncertainty activates the original threat memory. Hyper-independence narrows the range of exposure. If you never lean, you never have to feel the drop. If you never request reassurance, you never have to feel the silence. Dependency is not experienced as closeness. It is experienced as loss of control. And control, for you, is synonymous with safety. This is why relationships can feel subtly uncomfortable, not chaotic, not dramatic, just tense around reliance. Someone offers support, and part of you withdraws. Someone asks what you need, and your mind goes blank. Need feels foreign, because the system was built around not having one. Dependency threatens the architecture. It suggests you are not fully self-sufficient, not fully armored, and that suggestion alone can feel like danger. So you strengthen the armor, even when no one is attacking. If this helped you notice something about your own mind, consider liking the video and subscribing. More of this is coming. Hyperindependence is not about avoiding people. It is about avoiding unpredictability. When you control the task, you control the outcome. When you control the schedule, you control the disappointment. When you control your emotions, you control the exposure. Control becomes an organizing principle. Not loudly, not aggressively, quietly. You answer your own questions before asking. You solve your own problems before sharing. You absorb your own stress before expressing. This looks stable from the outside, but internally, it is labor. Because control requires constant monitoring. What do I need? What could go wrong? How do I prevent reliance? Emotional armor is not rigid on the surface. It is invisible. You may appear calm, composed, even generous, but you rarely let anyone carry weight for you. If someone offers help, you instinctively calculate. Will this create obligation? Will this shift power? Will this expose weakness? Help feels like surrender, not because it is, but because surrender once meant vulnerability without protection. Hyper-independence strengthens through reinforcement. Every time you handle something alone, the system records success. You survived, you managed, you avoided risk. Success strengthens the armor. Over time, competence fuses with identity. You become the capable one, the reliable one, the one who never needs rescuing. Needing becomes incompatible with who you believe you are. But armor has consequences. It prevents injury. It also prevents closeness. Connection requires asymmetry. There are moments when one person leans and the other steadies. Hyper-independence resists leaning, because leaning activates memory. Not conscious memory, body memory. The sensation of being unsupported, the echo of not being met. So you compensate. You offer support easily. You listen. You advise. You hold space. Giving feels controlled. Receiving feels exposed. This imbalance is rarely intentional. It is regulatory. If you are the strong one, you do not have to risk being the fragile one. If you are the provider, you do not have to risk being the one who asks. Control becomes emotional insulation. It reduces volatility. It reduces dependency. It reduces the probability of disappointment, but it also reduces spontaneity. You hesitate before sharing fear. You filter sadness before expressing it. You translate vulnerability into problem solving. Feelings become tasks. Needs become logistics. Intimacy becomes efficiency. Eventually, the armor becomes automatic. You do not experience it as defense. You experience it as personality. I'm just independent. I don't like relying on people. I work better alone. The language sounds strong, and in many ways it is. But strength built entirely on self-containment is solitary by design. There is a subtle tension underneath it, a quiet exhaustion from carrying everything internally. You rarely collapse, but you rarely soften. And without softening, no one can fully reach you, not because you are distant, because control is still protecting something that once felt unprotected. Armor is useful, but when it never comes off, it stops being protection. It becomes isolation. Hyper-independence feels powerful until you notice how alone it makes you. At first, the strategy works. You avoid disappointment. You avoid depending. You avoid the subtle humiliation of unmet needs. You remain composed, self-sufficient, in control. But connection does not deepen through control. It deepens through exposure. And exposure is precisely what the system was built to prevent. When someone tries to move closer, something in you tightens, not visibly, internally. A hesitation before sharing something personal, a deflection when asked what you need, a reflexive, "I'm fine." You may want intimacy, but you do not want to rely. And intimacy without reliance stays shallow. Hyperindependence creates a paradox. You become highly capable, yet emotionally unreachable. You offer stability, yet resist leaning. You appear strong, yet feel unseen. Because no one can respond to needs that are never revealed. Over time, this becomes isolating, not dramatically, subtly. You are surrounded by people, but internally separate. The system still equates dependence with danger, so even when someone proves consistent, your body remains guarded. Consistency feels unfamiliar. Familiarity feels safer, and familiarity was self-reliance. There comes a moment, often quiet, when the armor begins to feel heavy. You notice the exhaustion of carrying everything alone. You notice that competence has replaced closeness. You notice that no one truly knows what unsettles you. Strength protected you, but it also concealed you. Letting someone support you does not erase your capability. It destabilizes the rule that kept you safe. That is why it feels risky. Not because you are weak, because you are changing the structure. To allow dependence in measured ways is to retrain the nervous system, to experience support without collapse, to ask without humiliation, to lean without falling. Hyper-independence dissolves slowly, not through force, not through surrender, through repetition of safe connection. The body learns. Needing does not always lead to loss. Vulnerability does not always lead to shame. Control is not the only path to stability. Strength does not disappear when you rely. It reorganizes, less rigid, less solitary, more relational. The defense was intelligent. It kept you intact. But what once preserved you may now be limiting you. If this exposed something you recognize in yourself, consider liking the video and subscribing. Most people say they want peace. But when it arrives, something inside them tightens. Calm is not just the absence of conflict. It is the absence of stimulation the nervous system has learned to expect. If your early environment was loud, emotionally unpredictable, tense without warning, then your body calibrated itself to that rhythm. Raised voices meant attention. Distance meant danger. Silence meant something was about to happen. Over time, tension stopped feeling like threat. It became orientation. The body does not organize around what is healthy. It organizes around what is familiar. So when conflict disappears, the system does not celebrate. It scans. Where is it? What am I missing? Why is it quiet? Calm can feel like exposure, not because it is unsafe, but because it removes the structure that once helped you predict your environment. Conflict creates rhythm. Rhythm creates anticipation. Anticipation creates control. When someone grows up inside volatility, they become skilled at reading microsignals. Tone shifts, facial tension, the slight pause before escalation. That hyper-awareness becomes identity. It becomes competence. And calm takes that competence away. Without tension, there is nothing to manage, nothing to fix, nothing to monitor. And that can feel destabilizing, because if you are not regulating chaos, who are you? Conflict can function as a nervous system anchor. It gives the body something to brace against, something to prepare for. Preparation feels powerful. Stillness feels uncertain. There is a subtle anxiety in environments that are stable. Not dramatic anxiety, not panic, just a low hum, a sense that something is incomplete. When no one is upset, you might feel restless. When no problem exists, you might begin searching for one. Not consciously. The mind will generate small interpretations, tiny irritations, ambiguous comments that can be misread, because ambiguity is uncomfortable and tension is clear. The nervous system prefers a known threat over an unknown space. Known threat has rules. Unknown calm does not. This is where the pattern begins, not with anger, not with drama, but with discomfort in silence. Some people do not recreate conflict because they love chaos. They recreate it because chaos feels like home, and calm feels like a room with no walls. Conflict does more than create tension. It creates position. In any disagreement, roles emerge. The misunderstood one, the responsible one, the one who tries harder, the one who withdraws. These roles are not random. They are rehearsed. When conflict repeats across relationships, it is rarely about the other person. It is about preserving a familiar version of the self. Because identity needs reinforcement, and tension provides it. If you have always been the one who manages emotions, then peace removes your function. If you have always been the one who is hurt, then calm removes your narrative. Without conflict, the internal script goes quiet, and that silence can feel like erasure. We do not only attach to people, we attach to who we become around them. Conflict sharpens identity. When someone disappoints you, you become the reasonable one. When someone withdraws, you become the pursuer. When someone criticizes, you become defensive. Each reaction confirms something. I am the one who tries. I am the one who is overlooked. I am the one who holds things together. These positions create continuity. Continuity creates stability. Even if the stability is painful. A stable negative identity can feel safer than an undefined, peaceful one, because at least it is structured. Calm does not tell you who you are. It does not activate your coping strategies. It does not require performance. It just exists. And for someone whose identity formed in reaction to tension, existence without reaction feels empty. This is why certain arguments feel strangely familiar. Not pleasant, but grounding. The escalation follows a known arc. The emotional spikes are predictable. The resolution, even if temporary, restores equilibrium. Conflict becomes a cycle of identity reinforcement. Tension rises, role activates, emotion intensifies, self-concept stabilizes. Then it resets. Remove the tension, and the self has to reorganize. That reorganization feels vulnerable because it requires asking a question that conflict never allows. Who am I when nothing is wrong? Most people do not consciously protect conflict, but unconsciously, they may protect the identity that conflict sustains. And that protection can look like sensitivity, like overinterpretation, like always ending up in the same situation. Not because they want pain, but because they recognize themselves inside it. If this perspective resonates, like the video. Subscribe if you want more. No pressure, just awareness. Conflict is rarely chased directly. It is constructed indirectly. No one wakes up and decides to destabilize their own peace. The system works in smaller movements. A tone is misread, a delay is interpreted, a neutral face becomes evidence. The mind does not invent chaos from nothing. It scans for ambiguity and fills it with familiarity. If tension is familiar, ambiguity will lean in that direction. A partner is quiet after work. Instead of neutrality, the body feels distance. Distance feels like threat. Threat activates anticipation. Anticipation searches for confirmation. Did I do something? Why are they different? Something feels off. The questions are not manipulative, they are regulatory, because uncertainty is destabilizing. Certainty, even negative certainty, restores control. So the system escalates subtly. Tone sharpens. Curiosity becomes accusation. Clarification becomes interrogation. Not consciously, but predictably. The other person responds defensively. Now tension is visible. The room has shape again. The body relaxes inside the conflict, because the environment is now readable. You know this terrain. You know what comes next. Repetition compulsion is not about recreating trauma for drama. It is about recreating structure for stability. When early experiences wired your nervous system around volatility, volatility becomes organizing. Peace feels abstract. Conflict feels concrete. There is also a biochemical layer. Tension activates adrenaline. Resolution activates relief. Relief can feel like intimacy. Over time, the nervous system confuses emotional intensity with connection. So calm feels distant, but argument feels close. The spike and release cycle becomes bonding. Without realizing it, some people provoke micro-conflicts to feel the reassurance that follows resolution. A sharp exchange, a brief rupture, then repair. Repair feels warm, but what they are attached to is not the repair, it is the oscillation. Notice the pattern in language. You always, you never, you don't care. These phrases escalate quickly. They force emotional activation. Activation restores familiarity. The unconscious goal is not destruction, it is regulation. Regulation through predictability, even if the predictability is painful. This is why some relationships feel intense but unstable. The instability is the stabilizer. Without it, both people feel undefined, and undefined feels unsafe. When calm enters, the system does not know where to stand, so it moves. A comment, a withdrawal, a test, until tension returns. Not because they want to suffer, but because their nervous system recognizes the rhythm, and rhythm feels like home. When conflict stops, something unexpected can surface, not relief, emptiness. Without tension there is no spike. Without spike there is no crash. Without crash there is no dramatic repair. The nervous system flattens, and flatness can feel like loss. If your body bonded through volatility, peace will not immediately register as safety. It will register as absence. Absence of stimulation, absence of intensity, absence of identity reinforcement. Who am I if I am not fixing something? Who am I if I am not bracing? Who am I if nothing is wrong? Stability removes the familiar choreography. There is no argument to prepare for, no withdrawal to decode, no rupture to repair, just space. And space exposes what conflict concealed: restlessness, unprocessed grief, uncertainty about self-definition. Conflict once gave structure to your days. It gave you focus. It gave you urgency. Peace gives you yourself. and that can feel unbearable. Because without external tension, internal noise becomes audible. This is the destabilizing stage, where calm feels boring, where stability feels fragile, where you almost miss the argument. Not the pain, the intensity. Intensity is stimulating. Stimulation feels alive. Aliveness feels meaningful. So the mind may attempt one last reconstruction, a subtle critique, a small complaint, a familiar trigger, testing whether the old rhythm still works. But if conflict no longer activates in the same way, something shifts. The identity that depended on tension begins to loosen. You are no longer the rescuer, or the misunderstood one, or the one constantly preparing for impact. You are simply present. Presence feels exposed at first. There is no drama to hide inside, no escalation to distract you, just regulated nervous system activity, steady breathing, ordinary conversation. Ordinary can feel unfamiliar, but unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. Over time, the system recalibrates. The body learns that quiet does not precede attack, that silence is not abandonment, that disagreement does not require escalation. Conflict becomes optional, not because you suppress it, but because you no longer need it to orient yourself. The comfort of predictable conflict dissolves when calm becomes predictable instead. And when calm becomes predictable, identity reorganizes around stability, not intensity, not volatility, stability. That shift is subtle, but it is structural. If this helped you see a pattern more clearly, consider liking the video and subscribing. Anxiety does not feel irrational. It feels necessary. When your mind scans for what could go wrong, it does not experience itself as broken. It experiences itself as responsible. There is a subtle dignity inside vigilance. You are not ignoring risk. You are not naive. You are not careless. You are preparing. Anxiety gives uncertainty a structure. The future is abstract, unformed, undefined. Anxiety fills that undefined space with scenarios. If this happens, I'll do this. If they say that, I'll respond like this. If it fails, I'll recover this way. The mind constructs rehearsals. Rehearsal creates the sensation of influence. It does not guarantee safety, but it reduces helplessness. Helplessness is intolerable to the nervous system, so anxiety substitutes. Instead of, I don't know, you get, here's what might happen. Instead of surrender, you get simulation. Simulation feels active. Activity feels protective. If you are thinking about the threat, you are not blind to it. If you are anticipating disappointment, you will not be surprised by it. Surprise is vulnerability. Anxiety attempts to eliminate surprise. This is the hidden reward. Anxiety offers the illusion of prevention. It suggests that if you worry enough, you reduce the probability of pain. If you replay the conversation repeatedly, you won't say the wrong thing. If you imagine the failure clearly enough, you won't be devastated by it. The logic feels clean. Preparation equals safety. But notice the emotional shift when anxiety stops. There is space, and inside that space is uncertainty. Uncertainty is quiet. Anxiety is loud. Loud feels like engagement. Quiet feels like exposure. Without worry, you are forced to admit something uncomfortable. You do not control most outcomes. Other people will respond however they respond. Events will unfold however they unfold. Timing will move regardless of your rehearsal. That reality destabilizes the system. Anxiety softens that destabilization. It says, keep thinking, keep preparing, keep scanning. As long as you are scanning, you are not passive. As long as you are anticipating, you are not careless. As long as you are tense, you are not unguarded. This is why calm can feel irresponsible. If you stop worrying, part of you whispers, "You're letting your guard down. You're missing something. You're about to be blindsided." Relaxation feels like negligence. Over time, vigilance becomes identity. You are the careful one, the thoughtful one, the one who sees risks others ignore. That identity has value. It earns praise. It earns trust. It earns a sense of competence. Letting go of anxiety can therefore feel like losing competence, like abandoning a role that once kept you safe. The discomfort of anxiety is obvious. The reward is subtle. It reduces helplessness. It replaces surrender with effort. It converts uncertainty into mental labor, and labor feels like control. The system is not addicted to suffering. It is attached to protection. If anxiety feels difficult to release, it may not be because you love the tension. It may be because part of you believes that without it, no one is guarding the future. Anxiety is not random. It is strategic. It attempts to control the future by living in it early. Before the conversation happens, you've already had it in your head. Before the mistake occurs, you've already corrected it mentally. Before the rejection arrives, you've already felt it. This pre-living creates a strange comfort. Anticipation gives you psychological rehearsal. Rehearsal gives you the illusion of readiness. And readiness feels stabilizing. The mind tells itself, if I see it coming, it won't hurt as much. If I prepare for it, I won't be caught off guard. If I think it through, I reduce chaos. The body responds accordingly. Heart rate increases, muscles tighten, attention narrows. The system mobilizes. Mobilization feels like agency. Agency is the hidden currency. When outcomes are uncertain, the nervous system prefers action over stillness, even mental action. Worry is mental action. Rumination is mental action. Planning every variable is mental action. Action reduces the unbearable sensation of waiting. Waiting is passive. Waiting means accepting that events unfold without your permission. Anxiety refuses permissionless unfolding. It inserts itself into the timeline. It says, think more, prepare more, predict more. There is a subtle cognitive distortion embedded here, the belief that anticipation equals influence. But most anticipatory thinking does not change outcomes. It changes your internal posture. Instead of relaxed uncertainty, you adopt defensive expectation. Defensive expectation has a payoff. If the worst happens, you can say, I knew it. I saw it coming. I was ready. Foreknowledge feels like protection, even when it changes nothing. But what if nothing bad happens? The mind rarely credits anxiety for that. It rarely says, things went well because I worried. Instead, it reinforces the strategy anyway. Better safe than sorry. Anxiety also offers emotional pre-exposure. If you imagine the failure vividly enough, you believe you are cushioning yourself. You rehearse disappointment so that real disappointment won't shock you. Shock feels dangerous. Prepared sadness feels controlled. This is the paradox. You suffer twice to avoid suffering once. You experience stress in advance to reduce the intensity of future stress. But the future remains unpredictable. The system becomes conditioned to this cycle. Uncertainty appears. Anticipation activates. Mental simulation begins. Temporary sense of control emerges. Relief follows, not because the future changed, but because you are no longer passive. Anxiety reduces the discomfort of not knowing by converting it into the discomfort of overthinking. For many systems, overthinking feels safer. It is active, engaged, responsible. Without anticipation, you would have to tolerate ambiguity. You would have to admit, I do not know how this will go. I cannot fully control it. I may be surprised. That admission is destabilizing, so anxiety steps in as substitute control. It does not remove risk, it removes helplessness. And for a nervous system trained to equate helplessness with danger, that removal feels rewarding. This is why letting go of anxiety can feel reckless. It is not just releasing worry, it is releasing the illusion that thinking harder makes you safer. If this perspective resonates, like the video. Subscribe if you want more. No pressure, just awareness. Anxiety does not only regulate fear, it builds identity. Over time, vigilance becomes more than a habit, it becomes who you are. You are the responsible one, the cautious one, the one who thinks ahead when others don't. This identity feels valuable. People often praise anticipation. You're so prepared, you always think of everything. It's good you're careful. The behavior is reinforced socially. But beneath the praise is a deeper reinforcement. Anxiety becomes proof of care. If you worry about it, it matters. If you rehearse it, you're invested. If you stress over it, you're responsible. Relaxation, by contrast, can feel like negligence. If you stop thinking about the possible failure, does that mean you don't care enough? If you stop anticipating the risk, are you being reckless? For some systems, anxiety equals moral integrity. To be anxious is to be conscientious. To be calm is to be careless. That equation is rarely spoken aloud, but it operates quietly. The identity of the prepared one carries status. You are dependable. You do not forget details. You do not overlook risk. But this identity has a hidden condition. You must stay vigilant to maintain it. If you were to loosen your anticipation, part of you fears losing competence. Without constant scanning, who are you? If you are not the one predicting every variable, what distinguishes you? Anxiety creates a psychological edge. It sharpens awareness. It intensifies focus. It keeps you alert. Alertness feels powerful, even when exhausting. There is also pride embedded in vigilance. You endure tension others avoid. You carry concern others dismiss. You shoulder mental load others ignore. That endurance reinforces self-worth. I handle what others can't. This is the hidden reward. Anxiety gives you significance. It positions you as protector of the future, protector of outcomes, protector of stability. If something goes wrong, at least you are watching. Letting go of anxiety can therefore feel like letting go of importance. If you are no longer hyper-aware, no longer rehearsing, no longer scanning, are you still the competent one? Or have you become careless? The mind prefers the discomfort of vigilance over the identity vacuum of ease. Ease feels undefined. Anxiety feels structured. Structured identity is stabilizing. Undefined identity is destabilizing. So the system maintains anxiety not only for control, but for continuity. You know who you are when you are worried. You know how to function, how to think, how to prepare. Calm demands a different posture. It asks you to trust outcomes without constant rehearsal. And trust feels fragile when your worth has been built around anticipation. This is why anxiety can feel inseparable from you. Not because it is your nature, but because it has become your role. Letting go of anxiety does not only remove discomfort, it removes a function. If you stop scanning for danger, who is monitoring the future? If you stop rehearsing outcomes, who is preventing mistakes? If you stop anticipating disappointment, who is softening the fall? Anxiety has been performing a job. It has been the internal guard, alert, prepared, positioned at the edge of uncertainty. Even when exhausting, it feels purposeful. Without it, there is space, and space reveals something destabilizing. You cannot control most outcomes. Other people will behave unpredictably. Events will unfold beyond your rehearsal. Timing will ignore your preparation. Anxiety masked this truth with effort. Effort feels like influence. When you release anxiety, you confront raw uncertainty, not imagined scenarios, not mental simulations, actual unpredictability. That exposure can feel reckless, as if you are lowering your defenses in a world that has not promised safety. There is also grief here. Grief for the belief that if you think hard enough, you can prevent pain. Anxiety once made that belief feel plausible. Letting go means admitting, preparation does not equal protection. This admission is quiet but structural. It shifts you from control to tolerance, from rehearsal to presence, from simulation to experience. Without anxiety, you must tolerate not knowing. You must tolerate delayed answers, unresolved tension, ambiguous signals. The nervous system resists this. It prefers the agitation of anticipation over the stillness of uncertainty. But stillness is not negligence. It is acceptance of limited control. Acceptance feels passive at first, almost irresponsible, because you are no longer bracing. You are allowing events to unfold without gripping them mentally. That feels like vulnerability. Yet something subtle happens in that vulnerability. Energy returns. Energy once spent on rehearsal becomes available for experience. Instead of living in projected futures, you inhabit the present moment. Not blindly, but without compulsive scanning. Anxiety promised safety through anticipation. But safety through anticipation was always partial. Real stability emerges differently, through repeated evidence that uncertainty does not always equal catastrophe, through experiences where you did not rehearse and nothing collapsed. The hidden reward of anxiety was the illusion of control. The hidden reward of letting go is psychological flexibility. You can prepare when necessary. You can release when it is not. Anxiety is not an enemy. It is an outdated guardian. It learned its role well. But if it never steps back, it never lets you see that the future does not require constant supervision. If this exposed something you recognize in yourself, consider liking the video and subscribing.